Yeah.
So we want to make sense of a fast-changing world, Riz.
Thanks, Ulla.
And yeah, I tried to read up a little bit because I wanted to sound very sort of intelligent about the U.S. elections. And
well, first of all, I got Skavlan's spot.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
he's probably going to be sweating now.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of his. I'm friends with him, and I'm going to tell him I took his slot at SIME. He's going to be very upset.
Yeah, he was here digitally yesterday.
Yeah.
Could we see what I saw when I tried to understand American politics? And maybe you can comment on it later on.
Well, this actually...
this is... Sorry, Mats is here.
I remember the first time I was in a male fraternity with Brother Vico. You know what? Shoot him. I want some outside time. Right now. Baseball.
If I can't take my board games into heaven,
It's war.
and I will bring pizza to give him all of it. Perhaps PF change for myself. I want to welcome everybody to Taiwan. I suspect we have baskets of fruit. Big nice guy. And his partners know he has the decency to allow us to come over whenever and watch some cable, except if something's on. Wiener.
What's that?
No, it was
Horseradish.
actually...
Everybody's a winner. Except you.
Yes, we're gay.
Yeah, it was actually when I tried to sort of read up on some of the debates, I got into something called bad lip sync. And it's a new trend online where you take people, you try to find a voice and match that with strange things that people said. So I was actually trying to make sense of that for the first minutes. But coming back to a more serious note on the elections.
Well, it's actually no difference from what really Americans understand about politics anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But no, I actually was thinking about this because, I've talked a lot about the media, and you were asking me how the media shapes ideas and thoughts. And I always, I do have a go at my own industry quite a bit because we tend to fall into stereotypes. And I realize that, especially when it comes to places like Africa, we think of Africa in 3D. Disease, disaster, destruction, and, So I sort of thought, well, I want to dispel some of these misconceptions that were sort of thrown out there in recent times. And I had these slides which I thought would just help to dispel. This is not the equivalent of mobile phone in Africa, in the same way that this is not the equivalent of hands-free, nor is the North African version, which is a little less painful. This here that you see next is not the African iPod. And this is not an Apple in Africa. And these are the kind of things we keep showing. And of course there, smart TV is not preceded by this, which is safe TV. So these are some of the misconceptions we have. There is still a long way to go, as you'll see by this slide. Potholes the next 9,600 kilometers. So I was thinking, this is how we portray Africa in the media. And of course, India doesn't get a much better run either, as you'll see with this slide. Their version of hands-free. That looks like underwear. It's very worrying. This next one here is mobile security. I don't know quite what happened to the screen lock. The next one here is an airbag. So even if you're texting while driving, you can be a little safer. While we have this slide here, well, I mean, when Google launched, I don't think they were expecting this, Gogola. And when they celebrated, they didn't do it like this, chilling the champagne on the air conditioners. So what it comes down to, and this last slide sort of says it all for me, it's basically, oh no, sorry, this is the Indian technicians. You still trust them no matter what age they are. Look at this, computer software. And he looks like he's really focused. So this next slide here shows really what it comes down to is the reality and the expectation. And I would not want to be that tattoo artist. And sadly, this is all a reflection of what it comes down to, and that's the American election. Because it's amazing they spent billions of dollars, persuading the public how things are going to be different, and the reality and the expectations are really not that much different. So it's really hard to make sense of a country that can spend so much money on, well, essentially keeping the same guy in office. I don't get it.
No, but what do you think? Will there be any sort of major changes? Will there be changes impacting us or other parts of the world?
I think a lot of us are hoping, and I'm based, mostly in Washington, D.C., and I'm hoping that this time around Barack Obama has more, feels more empowered to make decisions. And I've interviewed a lot of congressmen and senators and so on, and the congressmen, I mean, they have to get ready for re-election every 2 years. And a couple of them are very honest. They say, look, as soon as I get elected, I start my fundraising for the next election.
Yeah, yeah.
So I asked one of them, I said, how do you ever do any work? He said, well, really, it's hard to focus on work when all you're doing is getting re-elected and you're focusing on fundraising. So I hope this time around with 4 years that Barack Obama can feel a little more empowered.
And what do you think would have happened if Romney won? Would that have been dramatically changing?
Well, I definitely would have given up my green card, I think. I don't know. It's scary because, you know, again, each person comes in with a big promise, and sometimes people just want change. There's Malcolm Gladwell, the author of Blink, Tipping Point, everything, wrote in one of his books about how Americans really fall for a certain image, and Romney fit that image. That kind of Reagan-esque, JFK, you know, full head of hair, kind of stature and celebrity look about him. He looks like he could be out of Dallas, you know, the series, as well as the place. He really, you know, I don't know, he'd have had a hard time, the same as anyone else, and I don't think he could have made much difference. This is just my opinion, but, you know.
What do you think? We discussed that briefly yesterday. What do you think the media's role is? Do you create the crisis, or do you report the crisis? Or how is that wave-like motion? Because like we said on a panel here earlier, it's like, oh, those guys are having a crisis over it. Oh, sorry guys, we were inconsiderate here. But we don't really feel that. But then after a while, when you've read it and you've heard it, you know,
one of the most, I mean, this is kind of, I guess, insider, but it's illustrative, and that is that one of the most worrying things about the main TV channels is that if you go into any TV channel, what you see are lots of television channels being displayed and on, and all of them showing the competitors. And each editor is looking at the others and saying, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we doing that? And so there is this kind of lemming mentality where if one channel carries something and the other one doesn't, immediately there are questions asked, why aren't we doing that? And it's kind of ironic that, you know, there is a great similarity between all the channels. People ask me, you know, what's the difference between the BBC, CNN, and Al Jazeera, these places that I've worked? And I say, actually, there's more similarity than difference. And I was interviewed in South Africa once about this. They said, how would you describe the difference? I said, well, I tend to, you know, I used to say at one interview, and I left the BBC to join CNN. I said, the BBC is like a Rolls Royce, and CNN's like a Ferrari. So the BBC has this history and this kind of, you know, long-term presence and everything, and you have a nice, comfortable ride getting from A to B, you barely hear the traffic outside. And CNN, you know, has to be there first. You're screaming around the corners and like it's hair-raising, are you gonna make it or not? But you tend to get there first. So then someone asked me afterwards, well, where does Al Jazeera fit into this? I said, well, ironically, for Al Jazeera English, you know, people think we're a Hummer. But actually, we're more like a Toyota Prius. You know, it's true, we kind of the new age, we're fitting into this in a very different way. What I think is good is that the modern, the digital revolution has really allowed people to access information from so many places they can judge for themselves. So the media does, in answer to your question, help to keep the crisis alive, sometimes generated by wanting to be sensationalist, but people have an option to look past it now. That's one of the key things.
A question that I've been discussing with many people, and some believe that there's sort of there are corridors of power, secret discussions where sort of the world is divided, and others think that, oh, no, that's just pure conspirational theories, that doesn't make sense. You've been in up close with all the leaders of the world, or many of the largest leaders of the world, interviewing them, moderating them, and so forth. What's your view on that? Do you think there are secret rooms where big corporations meet and say, you know, screw the rainforest, we'll do this instead?
Well, I don't know if it's quite as easy as that, because there is more accountability now, but I would say that there's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes that we often hear by accident. If you recall, George W. Bush not realizing that his microphone was on, was asking Tony Blair if he could bomb Al Jazeera's headquarters. And of course, it all went out there, and Tony Blair's like, you realize you have your military there too. It's an ally in Qatar. So sometimes things get out, but I don't think there's any really, you know, major conspiracy. I think there's a lot of little things going on in circles that you know, I have a theory about the anthrax attacks that took place in the US after 9/11. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. All these people who say every Jewish person was phoned in the Twin Towers to get out on time and stuff. No, but the anthrax attacks just didn't fit the model of what would be considered a terrorist attack. Tiny dosage sent to one of the American networks, you know, and sadly a postal worker in, I think it was the ABC postal room, died. Because she was already quite ill, so she was a bit more vulnerable. But this wasn't designed to kill anyone, it was just designed to scare. And it just seemed to be just too right, the timing. They wanted to scare the public into, you know, stay behind the government, we're there for you, we're protecting you. But I generally don't believe in the conspiracy theories too much. I mean, there's things that go on in closed, closed rooms, but not to that degree, I think.
What do you think about sort of when we were last here on stage a couple of years ago? We spoke about the Arab Spring. Since then we've had Reclaim Wall Street, and there's a lot of things happening with a lot of people grouping together, mainly using social media or gathering around the cause rather than an ism. They're not communisms; they're just pissed off at Wall Street. How do you see that panning out?
Well, the thing, people are not using the term Arab Spring so much now. They certainly use the word Arab Awakening, because you can wake up, but you don't have to get out of bed. And it feels like that sometimes, that people are saying, what real change is there? And the same with the Wall Street. I mean, bonuses are still being paid the way they were. Banks still, to a large degree, operate the way they did. So I don't know how much real change it's creating. It creates some awareness and people talk about it. But I watched the Occupy movement in D.C., the kind of tents just diminished slower and smaller, and then finally there's one guy, It's sad, but there is certainly more discussion out there. That's the only thing. At what point it actually creates a major difference, I don't know. I always joke there's a lot of perception that needs to be changed. And I give this example because I moved to America in 1993 from the BBC to CNN. And I used to always tell this story, I thought, it's a joke I would love to share with people, about a woman who got on a bus with a baby. And when she got on the bus driver said, "That is an ugly baby. That's the ugliest baby I've ever seen. It's hideous." So this poor woman, young woman, went to the back of the bus holding her baby, crying her eyes out. And an elderly woman came and sat next to her and says, "Why are you crying?" She said, "Oh, it's nothing, it's okay." She said, "No, tell me, why are you crying?" "No, really, look, it'll help you to talk about it. Tell me." And the young woman said, "Well, that bus driver was really nasty to me. It was horrible." And the elderly lady said, "Why? What did you do?" She said, "No, nothing. I just got on the bus. He was just horrible to me." So she was really upset, the elderly woman. She said, "Look, go there and give him a piece of your mind. Because if you don't, he's going to do this to someone else. Don't let him get away with this. You've paid your fare. I want you to get up right now and go and tell him off. I'll hold your monkey." So I told this joke in Atlanta. And one of the first times I told it, this person said to me, "That is a racist joke." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, of course it's about a black woman." And I said, "Not at all." But of course, the assumptions that I suddenly discovered this racial divide, which I'd never experienced in the same way in England. So then I had to start saying, well, this white English woman got on a bus with her baby, and it's kind of destroyed the joke a bit. But I say that, karma, and coming from an Indian background, I believe in karma, that what goes around comes around. Because that same bus driver was going along on his route one afternoon, and a lot of the senior citizens ride because they have passes that give them free rides at a certain time. So some elderly ladies got on his bus, and while he was driving along, after a few moments, one of the elderly ladies came forward and tapped him, and he turned around while he was driving, and she had a handful of peanuts. So he said, "Oh, thank you," and he started eating the peanuts. And a few minutes later, another elderly lady came, tapped him, and gave him some peanuts. He was like, "Oh, thank you very much." When the third woman came and tapped him and gave him peanuts, he said, "Listen, that's very nice of you giving me all these peanuts. I'm enjoying them, but if you give me all your peanuts, there'll be none for you, She said, "Oh, we can't eat these. We don't have any teeth." He said, "Then why do you buy them?" She said, "Oh, we like the chocolate coating." So what goes around comes around. Nothing to do with the election, but
But no, but a good story has its own stage.
Well, it's like the moral of karma,
But speaking about India and China and some of the other regions, what do you think will happen there? Sort of will the economic gravity shift towards? I mean, I think for the last 1600 years, China and India has been the largest economies, and now they haven't for some years.
It's interesting. A lot of times I hear people say China is a rising superpower. When actually I get corrected sometimes by Chinese people who say actually it's a re-emerging superpower because for so long it was a superpower and so much has come from China. Same with India. I mean, India brought so much to the world over the centuries, and of course we have these, like I showed, the negative perceptions, based on what we see as this kind of impoverished nation. And the thing is that America, to a large degree, is living in denial. I mean, it's an incredibly confident place and very, vibrant, and everyone's, positive. I love this about the US. But they live in denial with, their position in the world. It's very easy, with the lack of media coverage of the rest of the world, to be aware of how the world is changing around. I went up to Inverness last summer. I have a 6-year-old daughter. She was 5 at the time. And I take her on a month-long summer trip every year. I brought her to Sweden, and we were out boating in the archipelago for the first part. And then we went up to Inverness to the Loch Ness to look for the Loch Ness Monster. And what we found was Chinese and Indian tourists. And the boat was filled with Chinese and Indian tourists. And I mean, talking about really, you know, from India and China, not immigrants who were living in Britain and thought, oh, we'll go up to Loch Ness. It's amazing that the communities are spreading. The middle class is growing there. They have a huge buying power and influence. And I think the West is very slow to recognize this level of growth. You know, Brazil, you could say it's up there too, but it's a little more quiet. You don't, you know, come across Brazilians in the same way as Chinese and Indians and so on. And, you know, Turks, again, Turkey is rising to a large degree, but the Chinese and Indian buying power is growing incredibly. And I think it's foolish for anyone to ignore the impact it's going to have on the West.
Ending with sort of something that we discussed quite a lot, that there needs to be a reason that is authentic. People need to care about what they're doing. People don't care about companies that don't care or that don't have an attitude, or whether it's badass, as in Per Jörgen's example, or it's really, really good, as Stefan Krok and Godel and other companies. Do you see that when you speak to leaders and interview them and so forth, or if you're in the UN, is sort of being good more fashionable? And is it sort of authentically good or lip sync good?
I think this is where I would say America is a lot more aware. People are much, much more aware of the consequences of the things they do. And, you know, I'm still shocked when I go to other parts of the world to see people litter.
Yeah.
You know, and of course I grew up in Britain where people would litter and, you know, it wasn't such a big deal. But now if I see someone drop something, I get very upset. So, you know, America and obviously, you know, large parts of Europe and Scandinavia in general is a great example. There's more of an awareness and an active awareness and lifestyle changes. You know, you don't leave the tap running while brushing your teeth or leave all the lights on. And it's not because of the cost, it's because of the fact there's an awareness that this is wasteful. So definitely the US is moving that way. And I think a lot of that's filtering into corporations as the people they recruit are looking for corporations that have something positive in there, built in. So people can be proud of the brand from a number of angles, not just the fact they pay well or they look after their staff or there's a great, you know, canteen. So I think there is a greater awareness, and I think that will grow, and I hope that will grow. And it's certainly already emerging visibly in the US and certainly in parts of Europe, I think. And it's good to see that. You know, but as I say, it comes down to change in mindsets, you know.
Well, that's the business we're in. We try to change a lot of mindsets here. But
I was going to say, you know, with mindsets having to change, I'll leave you with one last story someone just told me about recently. And again, it comes down to how, you know, Barack Obama, they tried all this stuff to pin on him. You know, he's Muslim, you know, he's not really American, he's more Kenyan. And it's still there in some minds, because I heard about a flight recently where the pilot came onto the tannoy and he said to everyone, ladies and gentlemen, we're having trouble with our airplane. We're going to have to lose the luggage, I'm afraid. You know, we have to shed our cargo for your safety. So forgive me, but you're going to lose all your luggage here, but we have to shed that to lighten the load. So they eject all the cargo, but after a while, the pilot comes back on and says, ladies and gentlemen, we tried, it didn't work. You know, sad to say, we're going to have to start ejecting passengers so the majority of you can live. And to be fair, we're going to do this alphabetically. So he said, any Africans out there? And there was silence. Any black people out there? Still silence. Colored people? No silence. And then at the back, this little African kid said to his mum, Mum, aren't we like black, African, colored? She said, we're Zulus.
Thank you very much, Riz.
Pleasure. Thanks.